Hey, hello everybody and Happy New Year. Welcome to another episode of BHBA Family Law Presents Direct Examination with Dan and Lauren. Along with Lauren Youngman from Youngman Reichstein, I'm Dan Bemel, financial advisor and certified divorce financial analyst. During each episode of our show, we'll explore our guest's personal and professional history, digging to meaningful legal topics. We're excited to announce our upcoming episodes that will carry us through the summer, always at 12:30 p.m. Larry Ginsberg on February 2nd, Judge Amy Pellman on March 2nd, Ron Brodt on April 6th, Dan Jaffe on May 4th, Alexander Leichter on June 1st, and Kendra Thomas and Gina Kang are BHBA Family Law Section co-chairs on July 6th. The links are already up on the bar's event calendar and are available in the chat box. Lauren.
Thanks, Dan, and good afternoon. You'll receive your MCLE certificate shortly after the program. Please take a moment to complete the survey that's included with your certificate. The Family Law section is sponsored by White, Zuckerman, Warsofsky, Luna, and Hunt, and Our Family Wizard. White, Zuckerman, Warsofsky, Luna, and Hunt provides a wide variety of resources to complete almost any project, large or small. They also provide traditional accounting and tax practice services. We invite you to contact them to discuss your specific accounting needs and learn how they can be of service to you. Our Family Wizard is a secure co-parenting platform that supports divorced or separated parents in managing the daily responsibilities of raising children. Specialized features help co-parents organize routines, share files, track expenses and payments, check in at exchanges, send messages, and more, all while thoroughly documenting their activity. That's it from our sponsors, and we can go ahead and proceed with the program.
Okay, today we welcome Kristina Royce. Kristina is the co-chair of the Matrimonial and Family Law Practice Group at Blankfein. For over 23 years, Kristina has exclusively practiced family law, specializing in high-stakes, complex financial matters. Beyond her practice, Kristina is actively involved in the community, having served as a member of numerous professional organizations, including the Cedars-Sinai Board of Governors, the Cedars-Sinai Sports Spectacular Women's Luncheon, the Harry Buhai Center for Family Law, LACBA, and our BHBA. So Chris, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
This is going to be fun, and we're going to do something a little different at the beginning. Let's start big picture, but with an eye towards the financial side of things that I know you like to focus on. So again, big picture, how do you look at marriage conceptually as a partnership? And then we'll get to the dissolution side.
So I, notwithstanding being a divorce lawyer for 25 years, still very much believe in the concept of marriage. I think it's a wonderful union, but I think problems come about when people don't look at it as a true business financial partnership. And I think when marriages are recognized for all of the important financial rights and obligations that come with it, I think that builds a stronger marriage. So in other words, I'm very much in favor of like having financial intimacy in a marriage. I'm very much in favor of people feeling like they're partners with one another, that there's transparency, that they have access to information. Doesn't necessarily all have to be equal, but it needs to feel like a financial partnership or some form of it's some form of a business transaction.
Yeah, so how would you look at that? Let's break that down a little bit. I've heard you use the phrase financial intimacy before. So what does that mean to you, and how do you look at that being a part of a healthy marriage?
So I look at, usually when, people are getting married, you get married because you're in love, you have this emotional connection and sexual connection, and I don't think people put the same emphasis when they're getting married on how important it is for there also to be this financial intimacy. And when I say financial intimacy, what I mean is that they feel that they can speak to their partner about the finances that are going to take place during the marriage, whether that's going to be equal or not equal, or whether there's going to be an agreement or a not agreement. But I think it's really important that to have a strong sense of emotional and sexual and connective intimacy, that you need to also feel that financial intimacy. People need to feel like they know what kind of income people make. They need to know what assets there are. They need to know if the assets belong to them jointly, or if maybe certain the assets belong to one individually. I think having that sense of financial intimacy makes a better partnership. Like, Dan, you and I wouldn't go into business together not having a discussion about what the financial arrangement was, what your obligation to the partnership would be, or what my obligation, or what my role or your role, or how we're going to handle the finances. And I think the same should be true with respect to a marriage. And I think when people communicate better about the financial aspects of the marriage, I think that tends to make them stronger financial partners.
And so you work in a lot of high net worth cases. Do you see that being a particular problem when there's such a big gap between the earning spouse and the non-earning spouse?
I think it's a huge problem, where I feel like there's a lot of people who come to, I think, divorce lawyers, notwithstanding their high financial circumstances, that they don't really get a sense of knowing everything, as a result of not having transparency in the marriage with respect to their finances. They feel inferior to some extent. And I'm not saying that everyone has to have a role of being equal on every aspect of a marriage. What I'm saying is they just need to have a conversation and talk about how about finances and being comfortable with it. And it's not a comfortable subject.
And touching upon that concept of perhaps a client losing their identity in the marriage, like you just said, and they get to that point where they do get divorced. Something you've spoken about a little bit is the benefits and the positive side of divorce, how you can take control and become empowered. How do you address that with your clients?
Well, I think that's a huge part. I think clients come in these kind of circumstances when there is a huge disparity with respect to the knowledge and information between the parties. I do think clients very much feel a change going through the divorce process. And I think they feel more educated. I think they feel more a sense of control over their finances, and they want to learn. And I think they're excited to learn. And this is where I've done a lot of work with, like with Dan and his partner, Kelly, where I feel like they, as financial advisors, and Dan, especially when you have a divorce background, or you understand what goes through the divorce, as does Kelly, that you're able to really educate them and really help them feel more comfortable in managing their estate going forward, managing their income, their cash flow, managing their expenses. And I think they feel, Dan, don't you see that? You feel like they feel a lot more empowered after a marriage and having a sense of more control and knowledge.
Yeah, empowerment's a big word for us when we're helping an out spouse really take control. And if they've abdicated some of those responsibilities during the marriage, that is often, like you said, one of the most positive things that can come out of the process. It can be a little bit of a roller coaster along the way, but that's definitely on a deeply personal level, one of the biggest benefits to somebody who wants to engage in that process.
And I think they welcome it. I really do. I think they're scared at first, and I think they're overwhelmed, but I do think they ultimately welcome it. And I think people want to be educated in today's world and understand and become more knowledgeable about their finances. I mean, my goal is to teach all the 20-year-olds and 30-year-olds when they're getting married, here's what things you need to understand about getting married. It's more than just, the house with a picket fence and an amazing love affair. There's a business associated with it.
And that transitions exactly to what I was about to ask you about. What about with prenups? Because that's really the context in which people getting married actually do get educated about our family code and our system. Take us inside a prenup negotiation process, how you educate your clients, how you advise them, and if you have a different approach, if you're representing the drafting or requesting party versus the reviewing party.
Those are good questions. So I hate the word prenup. I think it's just, it has that negative connotation, which is people get so scared of it. I would love it to be converted if we can all call it a partnership agreement, because that's really what we're entering into, is a partnership agreement. And I think people are much less scared of partnership agreements than they are of prenuptial agreements. Typically, I go by the same process, whether I'm representing regardless of which spouse, but my process of doing an agreement is the following. I don't believe drafting an agreement until we all have a meeting of the minds as to what the agreement should consist of. So what I typically do is we all kind of get to an understanding of what the law is, how one party or both parties want to change the law. Sometimes it's much more favorable for people and sometimes it's more restrictive, depending on the circumstances. Then what I'd like to do is usually talk to the other side. And if we're all in agreement, great, we all confirm a term sheet and we all agree that these are the terms. So then when we draft the agreement and you get like term sheet going from 2 pages to 40 pages, no one's like blown away, no one's scared, no one's like shocked. I find it to be, and that's kind of like the same approach where I approach like the whole concept of a marriage being partners, right? Like, you know, we wouldn't, if Dan, I'm just going to keep going to Dan, but if Dan and I are going to enter into a partnership agreement together as a business, I'm not going to just hand you something without talking to you first, right? We're going to do it like, okay, what do you think it should be? How do you think, you know, what's your role? What's my role? What's your obligations, et cetera. And then we draft the operating agreement or the partnership agreement. So I take that same approach when it comes to prenuptial agreements. I think it's softer. I think it's easier. I think it feels more like an actual partnership than it does like, you know, here's a 60-page or 40-page document that no one knows even what it's supposed to say in it. Yeah.
Is there a difference in your approach when you represent the drafting party versus the reviewing party?
No, I'll do the same approach both ways because I think it's still sensitive and I think it bodes well for a better process to do it like where we're all doing it together and everyone's comfortable through the process. But I usually will do the same approach. I'll say the same thing to my client, like, let me not just give a 40-page document to somebody and let them not know what is contained in there.
Do you ever advise clients that maybe it doesn't make sense to have a premarital agreement, or are there specific cases where you think it's essential?
Well, look, I think there's a benefit about an agreement that it can make the divorce case ultimately more simple, right? And so there's benefits in that. The question is what is in the agreement and is it more favorable to somebody or less favorable? So for example, like last year I did an agreement for a woman who had been in a relationship with her now husband for 10 years. They had not been married. They had already 3 kids during their 10-year relationship. And the husband really wanted to enter into an agreement that reflected the fact that they had been together for so long. He had no obligation to give her anything during that period of time, but he was cognizant and aware of how he wanted to treat the marriage. So he did something that gave her a lot more rights under the law. There's times where I think people get married later in life today. And so people have already established a big sizable estate as of the date of their marriage. And I think they do want to protect that. I deal with that a lot with people who are, you know, in private equity or venture capital. They don't want to have the problems with like, you know, allocations of carry or promote and things like that. They want to make it really simple. A lot of people, which, you know, I understand, I've represented both sides. I can understand why the person in the business wants to protect themselves. And I can also understand why the other side is giving up something in that regard, right? I think the hardest thing about agreements are the waiver of support. I think there's a lot of people who do not want to pay support. They're like, I'll do what I have to do during the marriage, and I understand my obligations during the marriage, but after I get divorced, I don't want to be saddled with the enormously high support orders that take place in California, which I understand. If I was if I was a payor, I would want the same limitations.
Right.
But that being said, that poses a lot of conversations on a spouse who is not supported. Like I've said to people many times, you can never just quit your job. You have to work for the rest of your life because the agreement is restrictive in that regard.
So if you don't do it on the front end and you enter into a financial partnership, what about post-nuptial agreements? When do you think it's appropriate to look at those or create that business agreement after the fact?
So I think post-nups have become more common over the past, let's say 10 years. Remember, a post-nup though, like once you're married, it takes two people to enter into a post-nuptial agreement. So it's not necessarily that someone's going to enter it. So it really requires both parties to be willing to do it. So I've done a couple of them in the last several years. One was particularly interesting that they very much wanted to stay married, but they had parties had very different investment strategies. They had significant cash flow, and one side was much more risk taker, much more spending a lot more money. The other side was much more conservative, was very scared about the other side's spending habits. So we agreed to do a post-nuptial agreement where we basically created 3 buckets of assets. One was just the community income, paying community expenses. And then we created separate property buckets for, the husband and the wife, so they can manage their side of the savings in the way they each wanted to without having ongoing fights about it, right?
Like their own little slush funds.
Correct. Yeah. And they were like sizable slush funds, but
their own large slush funds.
Right. The wife really wanted to amass more savings and security and knowing the money was there. And the husband's like, I'm good. Like, I just keep wanting to do my thing. And this, I think, alleviated a lot of the problems. And I like that because it goes to the exact point of looking at a marriage, like somewhat of a business transaction or a partnership. Like they talked it through what they both needed and wanted and created a solution to solve their differences. Other times what I've done is where there's sometimes very restrictive prenups. And then they're married longer and longer and longer, and things are going really well and they want to stay married. Sometimes those prenups really carry weight on a marriage. They carry a negative connotation. And so we've done it where we've changed the terms of the agreement.
What about cases in which perhaps the parties are contemplating moving to another jurisdiction, or they spend a lot of time in another jurisdiction?
Well, it's so right now, with everybody, able to work remote and stuff. So a lot of people are moving, right? And it's interesting, California is very favorable in terms of community property and support, and not all jurisdictions are like that. I mean, Texas has very, very different support arrangements than California does. So one couple particularly, I know they were not contemplating divorce, but they moved from California to Texas and wanted to do an agreement that in the event something ever happened to them, California law would still apply because the Texas support provisions are so incredibly different than California. So you're taking a risk by going to a different jurisdiction. It's like you're, and it's hard to think about because you're not thinking about a divorce, but there's very different laws in different jurisdictions.
So let's pivot a little bit into some of our more nuanced topic today, or a more nuanced topic today. In the materials that we sent out, a memo and some cases around certain types of financial issues that come into play. Specifically, I want to ask about settlements, temporary orders and final orders, and at what point a party is going to be considered self-supporting from their portion of the marital estate. So why don't you tell us a little bit about how you look at that, and then we can get into some of the specifics.
So sometimes when we have such sizable estates and there's income generated from the sizable estates, the supporter, the person who's paying support, tries to eliminate or lower his or her support obligations, claiming that the estate is so big in and of itself that they shouldn't have to pay support, right? On a temporary basis. So there's two stages to a divorce case. There's the temporary stages, which is from the date of separation to the date an agreement or judgment is reached. And then there's permanent, which what happens after the judgment or settlement is reached. So the question comes about is, what should the support arrangement be during the pendency of the case? And if you have an estate that's so large that generates so much income in and of itself, should that eliminate a supported party's obligation to pay temporary support, right? That becomes the issue. And the law, I think, is pretty clear. The law says that temporary support is different than permanent support, and they have different purposes. And because we don't really know what the ultimate division of the estate should be, it's not fair to eliminate a supported party's obligation to pay support during the pendency when we don't know what the other ultimate allocation is. So I think what the case law and the statutes that I was referring to really say that, especially Family Code 4388 says, you should look at the supported party's separate property income first before you look to community property as a source to pay support. The case law talks about that temporary support is very different than permanent support in the sense that there are different goals and policies. That temporary support is important to maintain the status quo and just maintain everything as is. So if there's community income, let that get reinvested. And if the typical arrangement was that the husband was paying the expenses from his salary, then that's what it should be continued to be done. And permanent support is a different animal. We can decide that at the time of when we figure out what the ultimate allocation is. Then we'll know what the supported spouse's income is. We'll know what her earning ability is from the assets that she gets. We'll know what assets she actually gets to generate the income. So it's an interesting issue.
And another complex issue that you've brought up with us in earlier conversations is issues when you're dealing with people involved in private equity, entrepreneurs, people in the entertainment industry, where these are sort of special scenarios about assets and income and value. How do you handle those cases?
Well, I love all the complex cases. So I love the financial issues that come up. I think private equity and real estate, where you're talking about like carried interest or promotes, where you're really talking about how you get these streams of money based on the services that you rendered. The real issue becomes twofold. One is, what's the community versus separate property character of it based on what we call the date of separation, right? And so any income that's derived from the labor's efforts and of a party that took place before the date of separation should be community, and those that take place after the date of separation should be separate. And because these streams of income, whether they're residuals or carry or promote, may not come in until many years later after the date of separation, we have to look at that and say, okay, how do we determine and allocate what portion really is attributable to the pre-separation services and what portion's attributable to the post-separation services? And sometimes there's easy ways that we'll try to just do a time rule formula for it. Other times it's more complex depending on the nature of the services and how they were performed. And then on top of that, we also deal with valuations of the issue, because to the extent that there's a business associated with it or an enterprise value, then we're also monetizing that same kind of income for purposes of the valuation. So it becomes really interesting in that regard.
Is it similar in the entertainment industry, where there might be a residual stream from prior work, but it also has a current value?
Well, sometimes you have people who do, so like you have a lot of people who serve as the co-creator, the producer, the actor, and then there's a lot of times if you're not doing the streaming vehicles, you'll get some back end, right? And so the question is, what happens if you separate in the middle of a project, right? Yeah. Or at some point during the project? At what point, as a producer, you may have done a lot of work on the front end, generating the investors and working with the studios and doing that, but you're still doing ongoing services. The question is, when are you performing the acting services? What are the back ends attributable to? Is it attributable to the creation, the production, the acting? So a lot of it all depends on the date of separation too, right? And the question is, those are all very fact-specific issues, and it becomes disputes about that. There are many disputes about that. Let's put it that way. Then sometimes you have to divide the stream of income differently based on what's community and what's separate. And so you may do separate allocations for it.
And how has COVID impacted your clients when it comes to valuations, if at all?
So it's, at the beginning of COVID, I was certain that there goes the real estate market, there goes the stock market, there goes we're going to have no liquidity in our cases, which makes it very hard to settle cases if there's no liquidity. That's what happened in 2008. So I was figuring that's where we're going back. It's just going to be really hard. They're going to have to be living in houses together because I thought the real estate market would be non-existent. And it turned out, to everyone's credit, a lot of people were able to pivot and do a really good job. And we really we figured out the remote, we figured out how to, Lauren, you and I are doing hearings remotely. I did trials by a telephone without even a screen. We just kind of figured it out. And so I think there was a lot of people who did very, very well. Certainly in the service business, the dry cleaners, restaurants, certain people in the entertainment business, certain directors and actors, and were, I think, taking a big hit. So that I think the question is, and I represent a lot of people who are in the, dermatologists and people who do skincare and things like that. And I think they took a big hit. So the question is, how does that affect valuations? Do you just ignore those years as irrelevant, or do you, because people are hopefully trying to get back and they look at it kind of an exception, or is it going to be impacted in the valuations or cash flow because it's going to have more long-term impacts? And I think that's a case-by-case basis. I have a case right now where I'm doing a Pereira analysis on a business that's a service providing business that my client owned a business before marriage. The business grew in value. At the date of separation, it still had a high value, but then after COVID, it went down in value tremendously. So do we move the analysis back to a current valuation instead of a date of separation value because of the COVID issues?
Where do you think that's going to land?
We don't know. Hopefully we can settle it and not go to court and, we resolve it. But I think those are real issues.
So when we're talking about the fight, something that we often ask our guests on the show is how to deal with difficult clients, right? Everybody likes hearing what other practitioners are doing in those tough spots. But how do you deal with it, especially around these financial issues, and maybe having harder conversations about money and their lifestyle specifically?
It's really hard. It's really hard. I'm doing an agreement right now where I think, the prenuptial agreement where I think there's going to be very restrictive support rights if my client gets divorced, and I have to have the real conversation with her about she can't give up her job and she has to work and how important that is. And I've given some very scary scenarios to her situation that hopefully makes her encouraged to protect herself. I think it is really hard. I think the last couple of years, a lot of us have done we've seen a lot of success, but it still makes us vulnerable. It still makes us, I think, more humble and realize like, look, who knows what can happen. I think people are scared about that. I think people are scared to make huge financial decisions at this point, right? I mean, look, I do think people are moving, so that's a big financial decision, but I think it's scary for them, I think, and especially people who are out of the workforce and now have to get into the workforce is really scary for them. I don't know how many opportunities there are now to get into the workforce as it was pre-COVID for certain of our clients, but it's definitely scary.
Especially after you have those kind of hard conversations, or you're left having to really manage a client's expectations downward from maybe what they were thinking about before they got into the process. How do you deal with that when you transition out of a work day? I guess that's a common question we have about how do you handle work-life balance?
Look, I thought it was hard before COVID. It is not easy. Like, I think everyone, like a lot of our colleagues, and what we've talked about is, I think everyone in the last 2 years has been working around the clock. I think it is really hard. We are really trying to manage the clients. I think clients, now that so many people are working from home, we feel like inhibited from calling it like any hour, like, whether it's 8:30 at night or 7:30 at night or 6:30 in the morning. I think they feel like, can I talk to you right now? And I think not having that traditional work schedule even makes the boundaries looser. So I think people are I'm texting lawyers and stuff early in the morning, like, can we talk about this morning, like first thing in the morning. So it's really hard. It's really hard.
So you obviously have a passion and a skill for dealing with financial issues in a case. And it's really neat. We haven't really focused on that on the show yet. And I want to find out how that developed, and more broadly, how you ended up as the co-chair of the family law division of Blank Rome. So maybe let's roll the clock back a little bit and just get into a little bit of your personal history. Did you always want to be a lawyer?
Always wanted to be a lawyer. My dad's a lawyer. Always wanted to be a lawyer.
In the blood from day one.
Never thought I would do family law ever. Didn't even take matrimonial law in law school.
Really?
Never. Nope. Had no idea.
Why? Why?
I wanted to. Matrimonial law doesn't sound, when you're in law school, like the sexy area of the law. It sounds not as sophisticated as it really is. It's actually an incredibly sophisticated area of practice, but it doesn't sound like that when you're going through law school, right? And my dad was a courtroom lawyer, and I always wanted to be a courtroom lawyer and do that and argue in front of a jury. And I ended up really ending up wanting to ultimately work with people. And so I thought, okay, either I could be an estate planning lawyer or I could be a family law lawyer. And estate planning lawyers are not, that was, they didn't have as much courtroom experience as like even the family law lawyers do, right? As much as what I thought back then. And I ended up getting into family law, and I ended up working with 2 lawyers, one named Erwin Buter and one named Glenn Bizard, who I think were instrumental in my career, and also particularly instrumental in getting me involved in the financial aspect. So my partner, Glenn, who's now retired, he knew everything about every balance sheet, every cash flow report, every valuation. And through him, I really learned that it wasn't so overwhelming and so intimidating. I really learned to understand every number on a page and how important it was to understand every number, and why, a forensic was using this cap rate as opposed to that cap rate, or why they were making adjustments to the balance, to the book value, and I ended up loving it. And I worked really hard with Glenn over the years, and he taught me a tremendous amount about finances, as did a lot of the forensics that we work with, and they've been all very helpful. And anytime I'd ask a question, they'd be more than happy to, really walk through it with me. And over the years, that became very enjoyable to me. I really liked understanding the finances and trying to put the puzzle together.
What was the learning curve like for you generally, but also on the financial issues?
I think it was over years. I would be that pain in the ass, like with the accounts, like, why'd you use this number? Why was that number there? What was that adjustment? Like I literally would go through every single line and ask every question, which I think helped me understand how the valuations work or the cash flow works, why there should be sometimes adjustments to them, why they're right, why they're wrong, why they're more aggressive or more conservative. And I just over time really enjoyed it. And now, I think over the last 25 years, I think people's compensation and portfolios have changed and evolved, because now we have interest in startup companies or in Bitcoins or in private equity. And so now as people's assets and portfolios change, like artwork and, really interesting different types of assets, it's no more like just a house and a retirement account and some money in a bank account, right? It's more expansive. And I think that becomes more challenging and interesting.
And so what was your route working with your mentor and other attorneys in your firm? What was your route to partnership?
Well, we had our own firm for, 23 years before I came to Blank Rome. And I think I just started as associate and built my way up and started building a client base. And, as I built a client base, you become more valuable as a partner. And I always say that there's some good return on, having your kids go to a private school because there's some benefit there. It became like I think they both, both of the other partners in the firm recognized that the value that I was able to contribute and they honored it,
At what point did you start? Oh, sorry, Chris. At what point did you start building a book and a network, and how did you make time to do that while you were still practicing law and maybe working on other people's cases?
I presume in my 30s, my partners were very, very good. My Erwin and Glenn were very good at letting me bring in very small cases in the beginning, where I could charge, a reasonable hourly rate. I didn't have to ask for big retainer amounts, as long as they were able to pay like kind of the monthly amount. And I was able to really learn how to manage the cases that were smaller. And I think as you have smaller cases, then those get into, bigger cases and bigger cases and bigger cases. And they were very good at like letting me bring in these small cases, like people who were like, when I was in my early 30s, I would represent people in their early 30s or 35s and more contemporary. So now as you get older, you've now built, a larger network of people that and can serve as referral sources for you. So I was very lucky that way, and I think being in a small boutique firm allowed me to do that.
Sounds like it was very organic growth.
Yeah. It would just be like, I don't think as matrimonial lawyers, we don't really go market ourselves, right? It's much more word of mouth, and you've done a good job for one client. So they'll refer you to their friend or their sibling, things like that.
Well, I did see a pretty cool write-up on you in a magazine recently. So I wouldn't say that it's not totally true that you're not out there. Because that was awesome.
Being in a bigger firm, there's more opportunities, but when you're in a smaller firm, there's I think Lauren's word is right. I think it was more organic. But I was very lucky that I had two partners who were not like, Chris, we just want you to work on our cases and that's it. And you're going to do the work on our cases. They were very helpful. Like, I would bring in smaller cases or things, and they would help me on my cases if I needed help. They were very encouraging in that regard.
So how did you end up transitioning over to your current firm, Blank Rome, a large national, multinational outfit?
It was scary, very. What we do for a living is very hard. And my other firm, we had a very strong rapport and a very strong support system. I look at them as like, my firm was like a ride or die, especially with, how hard our clients are and opposing counsel and the cases in general. And So I was very concerned and worried about, am I going to lose that sense when I moved to the big firm? But I had met with a lot of people from Philadelphia. I met with lawyers in California. I met with lawyers in New York. They have a beautiful, like amazing matrimonial department on the East Coast. And they really were like hoping to replicate something on the West Coast that mirrored how the enormous success that they were having on the East Coast. And I had a part, Stacy Phillips was already in the West Coast office and wanted to expand. And Stacy and I had a long years of working very well together. And basically I took a leap, and it was, after meeting these people and seeing how amazing all of them were and how supportive and how much they still all believed in that, they weren't siloed lawyers. It was a firm. It was there to be there for each other. They were helping each other. They encouraged that. It's been the best transition I've ever made. It was the best career move of my life.
Well, when you were considering that move, and I guess when you were going around and interviewing and thinking about it, were there any concerns that you had? What were you the most worried about from transitioning from small firm to a major firm?
A ton. I think growing up with, Glenn and Gary and Erwin, we were always able to practice law the way we wanted to practice law. Like no one was telling me what kind of retainer to charge somebody or the hourly rate to charge somebody. And we'd obviously talk about it, but it was, it wasn't like no one was dictating how we were going to practice, like we all work really hard hours, but we do it however we need to do it. I didn't have to be in the office a certain amount of time. And so I was really concerned what structure was going to take place coming to the new firm. And they let us practice law the way we want to practice law. And certainly there's definitely things that are more of a process. Like if I want to hire a new associate, I could before I'd be like, walk into my room and talk to one of my partners and say, should we hire this person? Yes, great. Okay, great. Now it's more of a process to hire people, and you have to go through a more formal process, but it's been amazing. They want to help you so you can spend the time really doing the work that you need to do. So they help in tremendous ways.
So I want to unpack that a little bit. Most family law firms in LA are single discipline. Obviously at Blank Rome, it's a much broader multidisciplinary firm. What's the benefits of that structurally? So
that has been one of the best things for the clients. The same retainers I charge, same hourly rates, they go, it doesn't change as a result of being at Blank Rome, but the benefits that I'm able to provide clients as a result of having, many areas of practice and partners with different areas of practice has been tremendously helpful. So like, for example, I had a client who had a big complicated 1031 issue for one of the properties that he had in Malibu. And I'm able to go to one of my partners immediately, get them involved, help out. My client doesn't have to go interview real estate lawyers or corporate lawyers. Like there's people right then and there to get on the phone, and I jump them on the phone and they're there and help me and help do all the documentation. I have tax issues with certain clients, and Stacy and I are working on a case together when there's certain tax issues, and we have our New York lawyers helping on the tax issue. And they don't have to go interview and hire people, and they're right then and there and available in-house for everybody. I've had people who've come with IP, clients with IP issues, and we have an amazing IP department. We have an amazing corporate department. We have an amazing labor and employment department. So one of my clients had an employment issue in his company, and our firm was able to handle the employment issue. So that, I think, and the transition is seamless. So I think that's been enormously helpful for the clients.
How about for you personally, in terms of some of the other roles you've taken on at the firm? I said at the top that you're the co-chair of the whole department. How did you step into that leadership role, and how has that changed the way you practice?
I was very fortunate. I have no idea how I stepped into it, but I was very fortunate that they gave me that opportunity. I think they saw how excited I was coming to Blank Rome. Like they saw, I think, the enthusiasm and the excitement and how much like like it exceeded all my expectations multifold. So I think they really saw that how enthusiastic I was on the West Coast. I think they think it makes, I'm just speculating, but I think they think it makes sense that because we have my co-chairs, I have two co-chairs on the East Coast. I have, they're in New York, and I have and given now that LA is really expanding its matrimonial division on the West Coast, I think we now have 12 of us. And I think there's 22 on the East Coast. I think it makes sense to have that, the coastal balance, the East Coast, West Coast balance. So we can talk about, the trends, what we need to do for our respective departments. I think me being in LA, I'm more in touch with the LA lawyers than maybe some of the New York lawyers for LA. But so I think that adds to, just adds the benefit of that. But I love doing it.
Do you mentor new associates in the family law or matrimonial practice?
I certainly try. Sometimes people complain about me, like, we've just been the last couple of years so busy, and especially not being in the office, it's harder to really like nail people down and like, let's sit down and talk.
And no pop-ins. You can't just pop in.
But when we were in the office, we really got to do that. Like, we had our doors open and people would come in people were just sitting there and we'd work on it and we'd do it right then and there. So that's been a challenge doing it remote, I think. I think we're doing the best we can. And I think we're doing a good job. I wish sometimes I can give people a little bit more attention.
So what are that bit notwithstanding, what are your impressions of the up and coming generation of family attorneys?
Well, I think we have an amazing up and coming generation. I think, there is amazing, I don't want to use the word. There's a generation that, has, I think, really instilled good values and good training on younger people, just like Glenn and Erwin did for me. And how, I know there's other like, Dan and Neil and Dennis and, there's a tremendous amount of very skilled lawyers who have imparted some very good values on the younger partners and associates in their firm. And I think that it's going to really bode well for a really nice ongoing group of family lawyers. I think we have a very nice a nice group in our community.
So looking back over the course of your career in family law, how has the practice changed since you started?
Well, I think the financial aspects are more complex, right? I think we have now more, I don't think people are just like salary and bonuses anymore. I think people are, you get forms of compensation by way of whether carry, promote, there's I think a lot of like back end profit participation. There's, people want to buy and sell real estate. I think the nature of the assets have grown, and I think the different people's styles of income have grown. And so I think that makes it more complex because it makes it more difficult for allocation when we talk about data separation issues. And I think it'll be interesting with all the, Coinbase products and how that works. And, it's not like Coinbase, I think will be a really upcoming, interesting, not that it's not, it's already come, but it's interesting. It's not like if I go to UBS and say, okay, let's see the UBS, the year-end financial statements, for the last 5 years, and you can see withdrawals and distributions. You don't have that same access like to documentation like you do on some of the Coinbase products, right? Like you can see if someone was a client at UBS, if they like transferred money to Wells Fargo in the last 5 years, and you can see how those transactions take place, right? I think that's going to be an interesting part of Coinbase, and how does it have that same level of transparency that it does on some of the regular institutions? So I think that will be interesting. I think people are really interested in startups and, really trying to be more deal makers, where income is not as static, like where you don't have just a regular monthly income, or it could be so much lower because they really want to do deal making where they're going to like invest in the long run, and how does that affect cash flow and valuation issues. So I think that's kind of interesting. I think the artwork market is really interesting. I have had a lot of cases with really interesting artwork. And I think that is interesting. I think more and more people will end up doing agreements, like premarital agreements. I think people get married later in life at this point. And I think that when you're later in life, you've now had your asset base. You don't get married. I did. I got married at like 24, but we had nothing. But I think a lot of people get married later now, and I think they've already established a big part of their career. So that means they've already established houses and parts of their ownership interest in their company, and they've established, they've invested in various funds. And so I think there's going to be more cases with agreements.
Okay. And another question sort of about your impression about the practice of family law over your career. What has your experience been as a woman practitioner? Has it made a difference at all to you? Have you seen any changes?
I think our colleague, there's a tremendous amount of very skilled women practitioners in family law. I kind of joke with Kelly because I don't see as many financial women analysts, but there are many women women family lawyers. And I think they're, given a tremendous amount of respect. I don't think being a woman or not doesn't make a difference. I think whether they're kind and respectful could be a difference, but not because of a woman or a man. I haven't felt that in any way. I feel very fortunate.
So with the benefit of all your experience and everything that we've talked about so far, one of the things we always like to close each episode with is, what advice would you give to your younger self or to new attorneys just starting out in family law?
Learn the finances. I say, don't be intimidated by a balance sheet. Don't be intimidated by a cash flow. Don't look at it because it's scary. When you don't know, when you've not, here's one of the problems. We don't learn in college, unless maybe you take certain economic classes, or in high school, what a tax return looks like. They don't know what a Schedule B is versus a Schedule E. They don't know what a K-1 is as compared to a W-2, right? So it's very overwhelming for some people when you first look at these balance sheets or you look at the financial statement. And my advice is just go right into it. Look at it, ask questions, ask partners, ask the accountants, ask valuation experts, go into every number and understand it, because you're not going to be able to really cross-examine, and you're not going to be able to really discount values or challenge them unless you really understand every component as to which are variable, right? Some components are not variable, but some are. And that's where the movement is.
So Lauren asked you earlier if you're able to unplug and put the work to the side. I want to know what you do for fun. I want to know how do you actually do that?
Okay, well, I have 3 kids and a great husband, so that's obviously a great thing. But I hate saying this actually anywhere publicly. I was not a dog person before COVID at all, at all. And with 3 kids and my husband and I are both lawyers and we work a lot. We ended up getting a dog for our 11-year-old during COVID because all of her best friends got a dog and my husband can't say no to my 11-year-old. And now I'm obsessed, obsessed. And I don't say that lightly. I'm saying it very heavily. So we do a lot of walks. We go on, beach walks and hikes, and, we play, and it's given us a tremendous amount of enjoyment in our home having a dog. And I didn't think I would ever, ever, ever say that.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's amazing.
We did the same thing.
So nuts. He actually created an Instagram account for the dog.
Oh, I did not do that.
Yeah, that's how nuts we went. So it's been really fun having him. And I think, you've got to have the right dog for the right family, but forget the kids. It's all about the dog at this point. Yeah.
Well, on that note, it seems like a great place for us to wrap up this conversation. Thank you so much, Chris. This was really a lot of fun. To everyone, please mark your calendars so that you can join us for our next episode. They're all going to be at 12:30. As Dan said at the top of the program, we'll have Larry Ginsburg on February 2nd, Judge Amy Pellman on March 2nd, Ron Broad on April 6th, Dan Jaffe on May 4th, Alexandra Leichter on June 1st, and then Kendra Thomas and Gina Kang will be on July 6th. We want to thank Genna, Yael, and Belinda at the bar, the Family Law Executive Committee, who's led by Gina Kang and Kendra Thomas, and our section sponsors. And maybe if people email you later, we can find out what handle to search for to follow your dog.
Deal. My husband would be very happy to have more followers.
Get those numbers up, Chris.
Seriously. I can't keep up, but it's pretty funny.
Doggy influencing.
Yeah, no, it made a big difference.
All right. Well, thank you all for being here, and Happy New Year to everyone.
Happy New Year, guys. Thank you.